But we're also here to talk about In the Pleasure Groove, John's best-selling autobiography, which came out last year, and which he's been promoting heavily. It's a fantastic book. And before I forget to say this, John will be signing copies of it after this at the Bass Guitar Magazine stand. Make sure you're there. Now, John, the book is called In the Pleasure Groove. That sounds to me like a bass guitar reference. Could you clarify?
It is a bass guitar reference. It's also a reference to getting stuck in a rut.
Yeah.
You know, and grooves can be innately pleasurable until they stop being so.
Yeah.
And then they can get, I think it was the idea of pleasure also, being stuck in that kind of, when something, however pleasurable it is, it passes the point, the repetition passes the point of pleasure and it becomes sort of banal and mundane.
How did you enjoy the process of writing the book?
I did actually, I enjoyed it very much. I think it was at that place in my career where I really wanted to look back and I really wanted to own some of our past achievements. We, as a band, we very rarely talk about the past. We very rarely, consider our records. Once we've stopped touring them, we stop listening to them. We're sick of listening to them. And I kind of got to the point where I really wanted to sort of really take stock of the 80s particularly, and this seemed like a really good opportunity to do it. And yeah, I mean, I had a lot of memorabilia. I'd emptied out my parents' house, and they'd kept all this crap from when I was a teenager and the early days of the band, and it was really useful. And I had a very sensitive ear in Tom Sykes, who I worked with on it, and he and I thought, I wanted it to have a good sense of humour, and I knew I was going to have to go down, and there were going to have to be some slightly sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Sleazy scenes, one or two sleazy scenes, but in the best possible taste, of course. But at least with a good sense of humour, and I just felt like if I could keep it real. I've read enough, I've read a few over the years. I've read quite a few books by other musicians, so I kind of knew that, it could work. It didn't have to be a complete, wank off.
I think we can safely say it's not bad. All right, it's interesting you say that Joanne tend not to look back at, your back catalogue. Yeah. How does it feel when you listen back to the older tunes, and specifically the bass parts? How do they sound to you now?
They sound, actually, we were in the studio the other day, and I don't know why, I put on the demo of Tel Aviv, which was on the reissue of the first album. It was the first thing that we recorded in a 24-track studio, and it was nothing like anything that came out on the. It was probably the first recording that we did with Simon and Andy, and as I say, it sounded nothing like the subsequent sound of the band on the first album, but it had a polish to it. It sounded fully formed. Even though, I mean. Certainly Roger, Nick and myself, we had no formal, education. None of us could read music. Yeah. But it sounded like we knew what we were doing, So I think that's the beauty of rock, isn't it? That you can kind of pick up enough. You actually don't need to read, to be a good player in rock and funk.
Right. I was going to ask you, if you wouldn't mind, to play a snatch of a line from your earlier songs that you particularly enjoyed.
This is something I prepared earlier.
All right, hands together, everyone.
I've been dreading this moment. Okay, well, I suppose I could play. Okay, so name that tune.
Late bar.
Oh, I haven't played it yet. This is great. I'll be done in 2 minutes. We'll have the entire catalogue done.
What about I Always Like the Show?
Well, there's no bass guitar on that.
Oh,
Interesting. That's just some big fat Moog Taurus pedals.
Okay, cool. Right, good. But they sound good, the bass parts, when you listen back to them?
Yeah, they sound hungry and energetic. I think there was a big change between the second album and the first and the third album.
Yeah.
I think that the first two, we were talking about, well, Dave from the magazine and I were talking about Bernard Edwards backstage, and I still can't figure out how Bernard did what he did. He's he's really one of a handful of bass players, I think, that I'll listen to a song like Thinking of You, the Sister Sledge song, and I'm or Why, the Carly song, and I just can't figure out how he does it, you know, and I had, you know, and I was like a 17-year-old, you know, skinny white boy, and I was trying to cop that kind of style, and I ended up just like... It was all in this... It was all in that kind of slightly syncopated, but nowhere near the grace that's in Bernard's playing. But I was just trying to play as many notes. I mean, the thing about Duran was we were all, as individuals, I think perhaps because there was no central kind of songwriter, everybody was a star, and everybody played to the absolute maximum of their capabilities. So you've got very strong keyboards, drums, everybody's going out, as opposed to, say, a band like Coldplay, where I think everybody goes, or even U2, it feels like almost everybody goes in. And certainly the first couple of records, and I think Rio, that album really said all of that. And the third album, we had to try to sort of modify the sound a little bit.
Yes.
Sort of mature a little bit. So for me, that was like I started playing less notes. And then things started to change because Roger and Andy left. Yeah. And then the next sort of chapter of the band's career, which I would say was like from Notorious through to the Wedding album. Every album had a different drummer and felt like a different guitar player, but it wasn't really. But drummer particularly. So for me, I'm having to sort of rethink the way that I play. I mean, which is quite good in a way, because I've always envied individuals like Bowie, Madonna, Prince, that can change the sound, they can change the backdrop to their songwriting every album by just using different musicians. You know, we as a band, you know, and if you're a band, the good news is you don't have to change the musicians, but the bad news is you're not changing any musicians. You know, you've got to find new ways of saying the same. You've got to find new ways of saying things with the same lineup. And we were kind of in between. We had new players coming through, which enabled us to make albums like Notorious and Big Thing, Liberty, and Wedding album. They were all quite different, different sounding albums.
I noted with interest how the bass started here at the start of your career, and as you got more into the rock thing, Power Station, and then much later with the Neurotic Outsiders, everything moved down, became more rock. Is that just something that came along? Was it part of a natural impulse?
It's swagger, I think, is what you're talking about. Yeah. I mean, you can't play. You can't play that like Sid Vicious style, or at least I can't. I think that you know, maybe it just. I would say. Actually, I'm trying not to take that question too seriously. I think they probably got lower in the videos, but like on stage, I still had to.
I got you.
You know.
Yeah. Okay. Understood. Right. I'm going to get you to read a little bit from your book. Okay. As we all know, John, in the early years of his success, played an Aria SB 1000, I believe, right? An instrument which was unusual at the time, as you explain in your book, and indeed in part of the book, which I'm going to get you to read. That's all right. There we go. Thanks.
Okay, we're in Birmingham and it's 1980. I needed to step up from the cheap Hondo bass I was using and the cumbersome amplifier combo I was schlepping around with me. I replaced that with a slick PV amp head, not that one, but, and matching speaker cabinet. For my next bass, I was looking for something I could call my own, something with style. Another example of how the rules were changing at the beginning of the 80s was in musical instrument manufacture. Fender and Gibson had the monopoly on 70s music. Everyone played one or the other, and most bassists used Fender Precisions. I didn't want to be part of that or any tradition. Was that the times or was that the teens? As I've gotten older, tradition and being part of a continuum of bassists, writers and performers has become more important to me. But in 1980, I wanted to stand apart from what had come before as much as I could. There was a wave of manufacturers coming out of Japan, producing instruments that were strong and stylish, and the common knowledge was that they made the grade. The same thing would happen with cars 10 years later. I liked the Ibanez basses that Sting used, but they were expensive. At Jones and Crossland on Queensway in Birmingham, I saw and tried out a bass I liked the look of by a Japanese manufacturer I'd not heard of before, Aria. It had a similar look to the Ibanez, and there were two models on offer. The 1200, which had two pickups and active electronics, which required 6-volt batteries to power it, and the 600, with a single pickup, no active electronics, but sleek and very pretty, with a two-tone wood grain. It was also half the price. Maybe the Barrows, who were our managers at the time, maybe the Barrows were footing the bill, but I had no intention of taking advantage of them. It was a good choice. The Aria would become my signature instrument and get me around the world. I've never had the kind of relationship with my bassists one often hears guitar players having about their 6-string lovers. I don't cook breakfast with my bass strapped on, and I've been known to take it to bed with me only once or twice in really desperate times. I never became a real tech head, and I'm still using PV amplifiers. Every night at the Rum Runner, we were exposed to the best of contemporary music, European dance music, funk, disco, and jazz funk, all accompanied by a steady stream of vintage wine, champagne, a little smoke now and again, and even a little toot. The next few months found us auditioning for singers and guitarists. They would come to us from all over the Midlands, some from further afield, having answered ads that we had taken out in the music press. We would tell the guitar players that the singer was sick, and we would tell the same story to the singers about the guitar player. And all the time, Roger, Nick and I were refining the backbone style of what would become the sound of Duran Duran.
Yes, everyone, here we go. You obviously had a long relationship with the Aria.
Yep.
A couple of well-known bass players came along after you to play one, notably Cliff Burton of Metallica, but he was a couple of years after you. Jack Bruce also played one.
Well, yeah, Jack Bruce, I think, was the first big player that they used in their ads. And the band used to take the mickey out of me mercilessly because Jack's slogan was, "It's a bloody good axe," you know, and they used to point at me and say, "Ah, it's a bloody good axe." Yes.
Poor old Jack didn't have the flu. He could be here to confirm it.
Really?
He was supposed to be playing this week. So you went on to play other things. Notably, you played a Kubicki bass, right?
Yeah, I'm not quite. I think I saw that advertised in a magazine. I just loved the look of it.
Yeah.
And it had that novelty of the sort of pull down E string. It became a D string.
Yeah.
And we just recorded Wild Boys at the time, and Wild Boys was in D, I think, and it had this. Or maybe it was in E on the record, and we dropped it to D for live.
Yeah.
So it was. I could, you know. I mean, it's funny. It doesn't matter now because once 5 strings came along, nobody would care about something like that. But actually, it seemed. I've always spent a lot of time on the lowest note on the instrument, you know. And
by the way, are you equally comfortable on 5 and 4?
No, not really. No, and I never really spent a lot of time on a 5 string.
Right.
But yeah, I used the Kubicki for a while, and then I think the next thing was the Steinberger, which was I hated the small Steinberger, the first Steinberger that came out. Yeah, but there was a full-bodied version that came out later, and I think around about the Wedding album, there's a lot of that. I got a Warwick 5-string actually that I used on the Thank You album.
Yeah.
And, no, I was never really comfortable with it. I've actually been using it on the new album. Again, we were talking about, backstage was talking about the new album and the sound of the bass on the new album. And, you know, I just feel like we're really in competition with you know, these fat, low-end samples that, like every time you turn the radio on, you get this fat blast of keyboard bass, you know, and it's quite tricky, you know. We've got to find a way to have the, you know, I mean, obviously there's a human feel that you get playing the instrument, but at the same time, you know, the audience out there is used to that big sound. So we've been experimenting, you know, with Nick. Nick and I work together. He'll get a synth up, you know, we'll work bass, synth together, and the engineer will do things. We're doing a lot of detuning. So, you know, hopefully the album, you know, will have that real signature sound, but it'll have the sort of lower, you know, kind of EQ, you know. But yeah, it's a bit of a science, you know.
Yeah, hell yeah. Was there never any chance of a signature aria, ever? Just didn't come up?
Maybe it just didn't happen. No.
Okay, that's fine. So tell us about the PV then. Wonderful thing.
Yeah, well, you know, I liken PVs to BMWs. You know, I've been using them certainly since the band came back. So I suppose that's about 9 years now. And I was, you know, and I was living in America, and I was feeling the American instruments. I'm not sure. I think maybe the Cheetah. I think it was through Dave Mustaine. I think who was doing.
Of Megadeth, by the way.
Yeah, who was doing. He was working at PV. And,
you mean David Ellison?
Dave Ellison, sorry.
Yeah, the bass player.
Yeah. And you know, we started talking, and he sent me, and I think maybe it was the Cheetah that he sent me, this Cheetah 4-string, and it just never went wrong, you know. And I think that you know, once I get into touring mode, there's so many things that can go wrong, like the idea of having an instrument that I can play for 2 hours that really isn't going to slip, that is just going to do what it says on the box, you know. And I've found PV to be very, very reliable in that way, and the sound, the sort of, I mean, the sort of romantic in me, you know, likes the idea of playing sort of 60s or 70s Gibson basses with Ampeg heads, but there really isn't that room. There really isn't the room in the Duran Duran sound for that kind of a bass sound. I have to keep it very narrow, very tight, very compressed. So actually the whole sort of old school sound doesn't work. I've tried a couple of times to do that, and I have to come back to this, which just, you know, does it. And I tend to stick to the same, pretty much the same bass. Again, it's just a different story to guitar players. Guitar players can play a 20-song set and use 20 different guitars, you know. But it's never been the case with me. I just like to keep it simple.
Would you mind running us through some of the tones on the PV?
That's almost a muso question, John.
Yeah, it doesn't get geekier than that, ladies and gentlemen.
I think I know what he's talking about. This has a lot of tones on it, not that I ever use them or anything. We've got a volume.
Always useful.
Warm. I'm feeling Jamaica.
You had some quite warm tones on those mid-90s hits like Ordinary World, right? That was quite a warm...
My seat is going down. Craig, is that you? Craig Duffy was swearing he was going to have our seats going up and down throughout the... Now mine's going down. Now I'm shorter than you.
That's right.
And this mean I'm failing horribly. Yeah, you know, it's a great sound.
Yeah. Okay, good. All right, we all know that at the height of Duran Duran's, I don't know, Duran Duran mania, I suppose we would call it. Yeah. Chaps, can we have some backstage help with this? Yeah, there we go.
We don't need a roadie.
We have the technology. Anyway, at the height of...
Height? Somebody say height?
I would never sing that low.
But I might.
I'm going to get John to read another part of the book, all right? And this time he's talking about just what it was really like, what it felt like at the absolute sort of crazy height of Duran Duran's early fame, which they achieved incredibly quickly over the course, I mean, really, 3 years, right? 2 years even? You may think it's a matter of months. Anyway, here we go. Listen up.
I'm a bit nervous this seat is going to... Keep your eye on it, will you? If I start slipping, you know, let me know. This chapter's called Exploitation Time. 1984 was exploitation time. We were the biggest band on the planet. The momentum was powerful, unstoppable, and in the Republic of Gerania, the focus as the new year arrived was on how we, they, everybody could make the most of our meteoric success. Even though Seven and the Ragged Tiger had not checked all the boxes that Rio had checked, and we were not all completely satisfied with it musically, the band was getting bigger and bigger regardless. New Moon on Monday was the current single, but to half the fans that wasn't relevant, because reissues were now coming out, meaning that new fans who only got turned on to us at the time of Rio were going back and getting the debut album. After a 2-day video shoot in Paris for a long-form 12-inch video version of New Moon on Monday, the tour started up again. That's the board game, by the way. Started up in Japan. Freezing cold temperatures, chaotic and often snowbound. It was hard to get around. Now I'm going to stand up because this is making me crazy. The venues on the tour were considerably bigger than on the previous tour and included the Budokan Indoor Arena in Tokyo, usually home to martial arts championships, the Madison Square Garden of Japan. I knew it from the many live albums that had been recorded there, most famously Bob Dylan at Budokan. That was a big deal. The shows were nuts. In Fukuoka for a Sunday afternoon matinee gig, the roadies used brooms to continually sweep the stage, vainly trying to keep it clear of cuddly toys, flowers, bouquets, and other gifts that were being showered on us by the crowd. I had another altercation with an inanimate object on that Japanese tour. Drugs were out in Japan. The penalties for getting caught with any illegal substances were just too severe, so it was all drinking, and that meant things could get violent. I took my room apart after that show in Fukuoka. Why was I so crazy? As much as anything, it was due to lack of sleep. The daily workload of press interviews, photo sessions, and generally being a superstar on 4 hours sleep was taking its toll. One place where the energy level was not lacking was on stage. For those 2 hours every night, we amped our performances up to the max, even when we were wading through 6 inches of cuddly toys. It was our way of pushing back against that teeny block thing that was threatening to envelop us. Whenever we walked out onto the stage now, we had something to prove, that we were not who they thought we were, that we were louder, angrier, more aggressive and darker than they could possibly allow themselves to imagine. Seven and the Ragged Tiger is a beautifully textured record, but it didn't hit you viscerally in the way the earlier albums had, so live shows became an opportunity to compensate for that. We were playing fantastically well, in spite of the drugs and the hangovers. The guitars got louder, the tempos got faster. I was wearing my bass lower on my hips, fucking the audience hard. Harder than the virgins out there would have ever been able to handle. Who wrote this? Shocking. I chose this. I wouldn't have come if I'd have known I was supposed to read this. Oh, then there's a little bit of it. Oh, I'm not going to read that. Next stop was America, where everything had changed since we played MTV's New Year's Party at the end of '82. Both Rio and the reissued first album had gone platinum, and Seven and the Ragged Tiger was on its way up the charts. We had become superstars. We made the cover of Rolling Stone with the heading The Fab Five, and the night the magazine came out on newsstands, we played our first date at the Seattle Center Coliseum. It was our first headlining show in a US basketball arena.